Supporting student strategy use. As noted earlier, a learning strategy is a plan for accomplishing a learning goal that takes into account various internal and external conditions. As such, it is the product of the forethought phase of the self-regulation cycle outlined in Figure 9.3. The pertinent internal and external conditions may include the knowledge and skills that the teacher wants students to acquire, the amount of time allotted to learn certain amounts of material, the types of tests students take, the type of information teachers give students about test content, and the students' goals, motives, and level of self-regulated learning skills, I think. To help your students create good quality strategies, you should use the three-phase self-regulation model as a guide for teaching those self-regulation skills. But you should also remind yourself and your students of the following 4 points. The first is that learning conditions constantly change. Subject matters contain different types of information and structures. Teachers use different instructional methods and have different styles. Exams differ in the kinds of demands they make, and the interests, motives, and capability of students change over time. Accordingly, strategies must be formulated or constructed anew as one moves from task to task, rather than selected from a bank of previously formulated strategies. The true strategist, in other words, exhibits a characteristic that is referred to as mindfulness. A mindful learner is aware of the need to be strategic, attends to the various elements that make up a learning task, and thinks about how to use the learning skills he possesses to greatest effect. For example, a mindful learner would be aware that the age-old read, recite, review study technique produces higher levels of free recall than either taking notes or reading a passage twice, but she would also know that for multiple choice or short answer tests, there is no appreciable difference among these three tactics. The second point you and your students should know about good quality learning strategies is that because this is a new skill that will take some time to master, you will need to provide students with what is called metacognitive feedback. If you expect students to continue to create strategies and use various tactics for different types of tasks, you will need to explain why they work, the circumstances under which they work best, and point out how much more they learn when they use these strategies and tactics. The third point follows from the second and concerns both your motivation and that of your students. Becoming a self-regulated or strategic learner requires concentrated effort over an extended period of time. Consequently, you may be inclined to believe that such a goal is beyond the reach of most elementary school, middle school, and possibly even high school students. In the next section, we will summarize research that we hope convinces you that even elementary school youngsters can be trained to use a variety of self-regulation skills in context-appropriate ways. We hope you will use this evidence to remind your students that with persistence and effort, they can indeed become effective, self-regulated learners. Finally, because strategic learners tailor their learning processes to the perceived demands of a task, teachers need to clearly convey to students such critical information as what tasks or parts of tasks, such as certain parts of a reading assignment, are sufficiently important that they will test students on them and what form the tests will take. Students in turn need to accurately perceive those demands. A study conducted in the Netherlands shows that this process occurs less frequently than one would desire. The study examined how 22 history teachers and their 11th grade students rated the importance of sections of an 8,000-word textbook passage on U.S. presidents. In brief, here's what the researchers found. There was only limited agreement among teachers about which sections of the textbooks students should focus on in preparation for a test. There was only limited agreement among students as well as between students and their teacher as to which sections of the text were most important. In other words, teachers had only limited success in communicating to students what parts of the passage were most important or more important than others, and students were as apt to focus on the less important parts as the most important parts. These studies, these findings suggest that students, these findings suggest that teachers should provide students with clear and comprehensive information about the relative importance of various parts of a reading passage, instruct students in how to identify the important parts of a reading passage, and avoid dwelling on or overemphasizing aspects of a reading assignment that they have no intention of testing students on. Take a stand. Teach students how to be self-regulated learners. A perennial complaint among educators is that many students lack the skills and knowledge to function as self-regulated learners. This is a strange complaint because everyone from politicians to parents endorses the goals of self-directed learning and lifelong learning. Like motherhood and apple pie, they are easy goals to endorse, but because nobody could be against them. But when it comes to putting one's resources where one's rhetoric is, much of this support disappears like the morning mist. The following reasons account for a large part of this inconsistency. Many people, including teachers, parents, and students, believe that self-regulation is a natural process that students will figure out and master if they just work at it long and hard enough. This leads to the ubiquitous but mostly useless advice to study harder. School is thought of as a place where students acquire bodies of information about various subject matters and the so-called basic skills of reading, writing, and computing. There is simply not enough room in the curriculum to teach students how to be self-directed learners. Teachers and administrators are held accountable for how well students score on state-mandated tests. Consequently, school curricula and classroom instruction emphasize those skills and bodies of knowledge that relate most directly to state learning standards and test items, and the SRL skills are either ignored or take a back seat. If this situation is to change, everyone involved in education needs to realize that there is nothing more basic than learning how to be a self-regulated learner. These skills allow students to become proficient at reading, writing, and computing, and to direct their learning long after they finish school. Consequently, SRL skills should be as much a part of the curriculum as the 3 R's. The place to start is the individual classroom. At the very least, you should teach students that a relationship exists between the cognitive processes they use and the outcomes they observe, how and when to use various learning tactics, how to determine whether learning is proceeding as planned, and what to do if it is not. What's your response to this argument? Seems reasonable. If SRL is so basic that teachers ought to teach it, is it so basic? Yeah. Modeling and self-regulated learning. What little students know about the nature and use of self-regulatory skills has usually been acquired through direct instruction by teachers, parents, and peers, and trial and error learning. But there's another way to strengthen self-efficacy beliefs and learn how to use self-regulatory skills: observing and imitating the behavior of a skilled model. This form of learning is often referred to as observational learning or modeling. The notion that learning occurs by watching and imitating the behavior of others has been acknowledged and valued for thousands of years. Social cognitive theory, with its belief that the student's environment interacts with personal characteristics and behavior, has stressed the role of observational learning in schools. Observational learning can play an especially strong role in the acquisition of self-regulatory skills. Specifically, evidence suggests that these skills are learned most efficiently and effectively when they are acquired according to the following 4-level model: observation, emulation, self-control, and self-regulation. In the description that follows, note how the high levels of support and guidance, or scaffolding, to use the constructivist terminology, that are present for the observation and emulation levels are reduced at the self-control level and eliminated at the self-regulation level. Table 9.3 summarizes the cognitive and behavioral requirements of the learner and the source of the learner's motivation for each level. Observation. Attend to actions and verbalizations of the model and discriminate relevant from irrelevant behaviors. Vicarious is the motivation. Note rewards received by the model and anticipate receiving similar rewards for exhibiting similar behavior. Emulation level. Exhibit the general form of the modeled behavior, and the motivation is direct feedback from the model and or others. Level of self-control. Learn to exhibit the modeled behavior automatically through self-directed practice. Focus on the underlying rule or process that produces the behavior and compare the behavior with personal standards. The source of motivation is self-satisfaction from matching the standards and behavior of the model. And the level of self-regulation. Learn to adapt the behavior to changes in internal and external conditions, such as the reactions of others. And the motivation is self-efficacy beliefs, degree of intrinsic interest in the skill. Observation. At the observation level, learners pick up the major features of a skill or strategy, as well as performance standards, motivational beliefs, and values by watching and listening as a model exhibits the skill and explains the reasons for his behavior. For example, a model who persists at trying to solve a problem and expresses the belief that he is capable of solving the problem. What would motivate a student to observe and then try to emulate a model's behavior? At least 4 factors do so. Number 1, students are more likely to closely attend to a model and retain what has been observed if they are unfamiliar with the task at hand, or if they feel incapable of carrying out the task. Students attend to models they admire, respect, and perceive as having knowledge, skills, and attributes that they themselves would like to have. The popular conception, by the way, that older children and adolescents look primarily to sports or music stars rather than family members as models is not supported by research. In response to the question, what persons are your personal model? About 46% of a large sample, more than 1,000, of European children and adolescents listed either their mother or father, and 31% listed a relative. Music and sports stars were named by only 15% and 12% of respondents respectively. Number 3, students attend to models whose behavior they judge to be acceptable and appropriate. Thus, students will often model a peer's behavior. Number 4, students are more likely to imitate a model's behavior if they see that the model is reinforced for exhibiting the behavior and anticipate that they will be similarly reinforced. This type of reinforcement is referred to as a vicarious reinforcement. A middle school student, for example, who observes an admired classmate being praised by the teacher for promptly completing an assignment may strive to work quickly and diligently on the next assignment in anticipation of receiving similar praise. Emulation. At the emulation level, learners reproduce the general form of the model's behavior. Because learners rarely copy the exact behaviors of a model, the term emulation is used here instead of imitation. The learner's response can be refined by the model's use of guidance, feedback, and direct reinforcement, such as praise from the model. Social cognitive theorists identify 4 types of emulation effects that result from observing models: inhibition, disinhibition, facilitation, and true observational learning. Inhibition occurs when we learn not to do something that we already know how to do because a model we are observing refrains from behaving in that way, is punished for behaving in that way, or does something different from what we intended to do. Consider the following example. A 10-year-old is taken to her first symphony concert by her parents. After the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, she is about to applaud, but she notices that her parents are sitting quietly with their hands in their laps. she does the same. Disinhibition occurs when we learn to exhibit a behavior that is usually disapproved of by most people because a model does the same without being punished. For example, a student attends his school's final football game of the season. As time expires, thousands of students run onto the field and begin tearing up pieces of turf to take home as a souvenir. Noticing that the police do nothing, the student joins in. An early and now classic experiment on disinhibition was conducted by Bandera in the early 1960s. A child was seated at a table and encouraged to play with a toy. The model sat at a nearby table and either played quietly with Tinker Toys you can see a picture of what they look like on Wikipedia for 10 minutes, or played with the Tinker Toys for a minute, and then played aggressively with an inflatable clown, Bobo doll, for several minutes, punching, kicking, and sitting on it, and hitting it with a hammer. In a subsequent unstructured play situation, children who did not observe a model, as well as those who observed a non-aggressive model, displayed little aggression. By contrast, children exposed to the aggressive model behaved with considerably more aggression toward the Bobo doll and other toys. Facilitation occurs whenever we are prompted to do something that we do not ordinarily do because of insufficient motivation rather than social disapproval. For example, a college student attends a lecture on reforming the American education system. Impressed by the lecturer's enthusiasm and ideas, the student vigorously applauds at the end of the presentation. As several members of the audience stand and applaud, the student stands as well. The last of the four types of emulation effects, true observational learning, occurs when we learn a new behavioral pattern by watching and imitating the performance of someone else. A teenage girl learning how to hit a topspin forehand in tennis by watching her instructor do the same is an example of true observational learning. Improving practice through inquiry. One teacher's story. Learning how to set and reach goals. One evening with grocery bags in tow, I proceeded to cross the supermarket parking lot and heard Mrs. Macklin, the way that students and former students alike do when they see me off school grounds. The voice was a bit deeper than most. A lanky figure, over 6 feet tall, approached me with a familiar grin that had greeted me every morning in my classroom for 3 years. I recognized his face instantly as he bent down to hug me. The last time I had seen Yusuf was 6 years ago at his 5th grade commencement. He was now 16 years old and telling me that he was a junior at Westinghouse High School with plans to attend Slippery Rock University in the very near future. Yusuf beamed as he described a recent campus visit. I could only smile, listen attentively, and try to suppress the tears of joy that I felt beginning to well up behind my glasses. It was then that I realized Yusuf had learned something about the importance of setting goals. Yusuf was one of my most memorable students in learning support. He was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and a reading disability. However, his emotional outbursts during awards assemblies were always a source of frustration for me, as I didn't know what to do about them. As the only special education teacher in the school, it was my responsibility to remove Yusuf from assemblies and accompany him to my resource room. On numerous occasions he became disruptive, yelling, "It's not fair," as some of the students from his 4th grade class were presented with certificates for high honor roll, etc. Setting achievable goals was one of the issues that Yusuf struggled with a lot. I decided there had to be a better way to help him see that it was indeed possible for him to end his negative feelings and take control of the situation in a more positive manner. Yusuf was a highly motivated student but struggled to do high-quality work and scored poorly on exams because he was easily distracted in class. For 3 consecutive grade report periods, Yusuf protested that he should have received an award. During one of his timeouts in my classroom, I counseled Yusuf on how to become a more independent and effective learner. I explained to him that first he had to decide what type of award he wanted to earn. Next, I conveyed that Yusuf needed to set a goal and write it on paper. I used an analogy that an athletic student like Yusuf could relate to, running a race. Using dry erase markers, I wrote "start" in green and "finish" in red. At the finish line, I wrote the goal, and he dictated to me, which was to make honor roll. Between start and finish, I left enough space for me to chart additional responses from the student. I asked Yusuf to tell me what the hurdles or obstacles were that he needed to jump over to reach his goal. I drew simple representations of hurdles. Written above them in blue were the problems that he encountered in class. Together we brainstormed in purple the possible solutions to these problems. Yusuf didn't make honor roll in the final grade report of that year. However, he did receive a certificate for improvement in reading. The next year found a more academically committed Yusuf who made honor roll during the first report period. As I learned in the parking lot, he seems also to have learned how to set and reach goals. Ella M. Macklin was formerly a Special Education Services Coordinator and teacher, Urban League of Greater Pittsburgh. But I'm sure she was a Browns fan anyway. Self-control. The self-control level of observational learning is marked by the learners being able to exhibit the modeled behavior in the absence of the model. Self-control is achieved through self-directed practice. The learner focuses on the underlying rule or process that produces the behavior and compares the behavior with personal standards. At this level, the learner's motivation comes from a sense of self-satisfaction at matching the standards and behavior of the model. Self-regulation. The self-regulation level is attained when learners can adapt the modeled behavior to changes in internal and external conditions, such as a low level of interest in a topic or negative reactions of others. The motivation for self-regulated behavior comes from one's perceived self-efficacy and degree of intrinsic interest in the modeled behavior. Before leaving the description of SRL and examining some of the relevant research, we would like you to keep 3 points in mind. First, self-regulation is possible only in an environment that allows students the opportunity to make choices. Teachers who specify in great detail what students will do, when they will do it, where they will do it, and how they will do it, will see very little development and use of SRL processes. Second, those who become self-regulated learners in school are much more likely to enjoy better health, higher income, and more positive interpersonal relationships across their lifespan. Third, the development of self-regulated learning capacity can be affected by adverse childhood experiences, as discussed in Chapter 5, Addressing Cultural and Socioeconomic Diversity.